So hi everyone, welcome to In Between. I'm very excited, and like I just said, I'm very, very honored to have one of the best minds that hopefully I'm going to try to dig into as best I can here in Richard Linklater. Richard, how are you? Where are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm in Bastrop, Texas.
So obviously we're here to talk about Apollo 10 and a half, which is your latest feature film that's streaming currently on Netflix.
We need a kid like you to test this accidentally smaller version on the lunar surface, and soon.
Stan, you're our only hope.
Okay.
Great. Let's forget about all this for now. We'll come back to this part later.
I always find like a good place to start when you're talking about a story is just to fundamentally ask what the story is about. So I've watched it, but if you could just talk briefly about what is this about?
Yeah, I ask that every movie, like, okay, what is it about? If you're adapting a story or a book, what is it about? And I'm pretty simple-minded. I can drill that down to one thing usually, or like I try to anyway.
Yeah.
In this case, it was what it felt like to be a kid as we walked on the moon. That's what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
What it felt like to be a kid in the shadow of NASA at that kind of incredible moment in time.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's all.
what it was.
That's all.
I think that's what it's about. But then what it is kind of an intermingling of a couple stories. You know, it's the historical recreation of that moment. Mm-hmm. And then it's also this fantasy, this kid fantasy, the life of that. So it's a few things.
And I like that you say that it's kind of, obviously this kid's fantasy is one element of it, and the other is the historical recreation of that moment, but also not just that, you tell that historical recreation through like archival footage, quote unquote,
mm-hmm.
True animation, but you're mixing it through the kind of day-to-day life of this kid. But this whole thing is primarily told through an elongated flashback. Like one thing I've always noticed about your films is, there's a really unique approach to storytelling. Do you enjoy kind of playing with what is taught as the usual structure of a narrative?
I think so. I must, because I'm always kind of like, I think I've seen it before. I don't want to tread too similar around. So I just think there's a unique way to read, or I'm looking for there's a million stories in the world. It's like, once you get on one, it's like, okay, how to tell it. Here's what I want to express, how to express it. So I'm always looking for the right form, and I'll spend years thinking of it, like what's the exact right, is there something unique to be told, here? Yeah. Is there, I think that's the crucial time, I think, where you're really, if you're going to be original at all, it'll come at that stage, at the original conceptual element will be there at the very beginning, and then it's in this area of how to tell a story. So, and, in this case, it was just how to mingle the fantasy and the reality, and to make those on the same level plane. And you couldn't get a bigger contrast between kind of the grandest achievement in human history and, taking out the trash and, playing in the neighborhood, to bring those two things like into one story was the goal here, to see from the eyes of a kid, or kind of a bottom-up view. That was my goal here, to kind of show that angle.
Why was that your goal? Like, what was the original?
Well, I
process?
think it's been done. We've seen enough astronaut movies, and this ground has been covered from so many angles. But it hit me that I had lived near NASA at that time, mm-hmm. and that was just an interesting time to be a kid, And I thought, oh yeah, there's another angle here worthy of exploration, mm-hmm. And it's just, and of course, personally, it was just me wanting to express my own relation to that, and to a fantasy I actually had, the little kid fantasy runs through this movie is a fantasy I had probably around first grade,
Yeah.
like, it's like, I think that's what defines when childhood ends, when you can't, you realize how the world works. The physical laws of the universe are becoming very clear to you, and your own little insignificant position in the world is like, oh my God, I'm, it's like, oh, we're nothing, it's like, that's when childhood ends, but before that, you can have these kind of crazy ideas, and it's some kind of like wish fulfillment. I don't know. You see it in movies like, so many, it's a trope, Harry Potter, like Princess Diaries, whatever. It's like, oh, you're actually special. You're just, you feel like you're nobody from nowhere, but actually,
yeah. Turns out you're the one we want. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got a mission, and here's something special that's just for you, so
yeah,
it's that kind of basic kid story, but it was a fantasy of mine. So I've always liked those kind of stories because I can relate, who can't? And so, to mix the goofiness of that, you could say, to ground it in kind of a specificity of a time and a place and a real mission, historically very well documented time,
A therapeutic narrative, some people would call it,
Therapeutic.
Yeah, to some degree. Most of the time people say that, like, when you're making a film, and I found this in my own experience, like you do have to kind of dig deep into, to be honest with parts of yourself. Otherwise it's not going to come across correct. You're never going to connect with someone unless you're able to. Yeah,
you make that leap early on, I think, as a storyteller, as a writer. I mean, that's the big leap you have to truly make. To realize your own life is subject matter and have the confidence to move forward, being honest about that. Like, once you can make that leap to think that that's worthwhile, then you're a writer, then you're but I think everyone starts off way outside themselves. Like, even when I first knew I wanted to make films, I didn't know what kind even. I was like, I like science fiction. In my world, I could have been making Star Wars or, any of these kind of fantastical, crazy things. But the more I got close to it, I was like, oh no, here's who I am. And here's what I have to offer. And that leap of what of yourself you're going to put into things, and that your own life was worthy of being a work of fiction.
Yeah.
So when you make that leap, then I think you don't really go back. You're there, and it gives you a certain confidence. You don't question it. You don't, oh, is this worthy? It's like, no, that's what I'm going to do. That's who I am.
Exactly. Yeah. This is my story. Yeah. This is who I am. Yeah.
I tell film students that it's like, are you on original territory? Even if you're not, it's like, well, this film's never, that story's been told before, but not by you.
Yeah.
So the challenge there is, what can you bring to it?
I remember during college, we were given a list of maybe 10 films to watch. One was Waking Life, which is obviously your first foray into animation.
Perfect for college kids too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is my master's, so I was slightly beyond it,
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was the eternal college kid who never graduated.
Yeah. Do you still think you're the college kid, or are you living in space right now? Where's your...
Yeah, eternal college kid, I think. That's the thing about never graduating. You don't think you ever quite got there. So it makes you a student for life, really.
Yeah. I get what
you never get academically accredited. It puts you a little behind, and then you never get to feel like, you're in the realm of the... Don't they say that the Harvard at the graduation, welcome to the world of the educated. So if you don't feel like you're fully educated, you're playing catch up the rest of your life, which I think that's a good position to approach the world from.
Lifelong learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel like your storytelling is really just a celebration of life, whatever form that comes, even in innocuous details. And that's obviously something that animation is very good at capturing. You know, like, is there a reason why you came back for animation for this film? Or was it just, has it been something in your heart for a while, or you're just like, oh, this is just a good way to tell this story?
Well, the story was in my heart. I mean, you mentioned Waking Life just a second ago, and it came from the same area. It's like the film in my head isn't working live action. You know, it doesn't really, that's not the place in the brain I want to see it from. So when I made the leap in my mind to animation, and I'm fortunate to be able to do that because I've made animation films. I understand it. It's a possible expressive element on my storytelling, in my storytelling options. Yeah. And so in this case, when you make that leap, then it's like, oh, now it works. Yeah. I like I was saying, I wanted all those things on the same playing field. I want them in your mind in the same way. Yeah. Live action, you're kind of critical. So it's like, oh, that's not quite real. But if I can kind of drown the audience in specificity and history, I can maybe sneak in this kind of fantastical, crazy story too. And your brain will accept it as one thing. Yeah. That's the trick I'm trying to, the little magic trick we're trying to pull off here. So everything's a trick, but it was a fun weave, you know, of all these stories, but the animation's a big part of that. And it's sort of the look and feel too. We could get those textures, that scrapbook feel of 60s. We could kind of mix film stocks and genres and graphic styles and color palettes and, you know, create the textures of that and get that kind of documentary look. I haven't seen a lot of period animated films and not a lot of animated films that bring in like documentary footage the way you might in a narrative. So my narrative thinking of those years when I was thinking in the head wasn't quite working, but I still brought over elements of that I was thinking of experimenting with, having documentary footage or actual TV footage or, you know, things from the time. If it had been live action, I would have had a lot of that, I think. So I said, well, let's just do all that in animation. Yeah. The way we're bringing in Vietnam footage or anything else from TV footage, you know, I'm kind of bringing in iconic footage too, 2001 or Sound of Music or, you know, these existing images. We're inviting all this imagery to come to our world and be one, you know? So it was fun to play with that, you know, to bring in those, and, you know, even Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck show up for a second, you know, our animation, you know? Yeah. No, I think it like, that's something that lends so much to the film, is it like, obviously rotoscope ideas of style, like, is so successful in a sense because it brings that element of like verisimilitude to the screen, you know, like there's an authenticity to the performance, but by, you know, bringing in all that documentary footage, like you said, drowning people in that kind of stuff, I think is funny way to phrase it. But you're right, it's something that I'd never noticed before, because animation is really, really good at straddling the line between like mimesis in what we see and abstraction as to what we feel, you know, and how it balances on that line is really, really perfect to tell, you know, the internal thoughts of a character externally. And, you know, I always feel like it captures reality in a very solid way that live action doesn't. Like you said, we're much more critical of live action, you know, we can't step back from that. And is that the part of the reason why you always go back to rotoscoping as part of an element? Because there's so many different styles of animation. Is that? Yeah, I think it's my default mode because I'm going for a similar reality the way I would be in live action, as far as like, I want you to think these performances are real, that we just turn on a camera and this is what's really happening. I'm often, you know, people think the actors are improvising or that it's real, and it's not, you know, it's written and rehearsed to the T. It's all that, but I want you to think it's real. And so in the same way in the animation, I kind of want you to think it's real by how to do that, getting real human gestures, real expressions. It's kind of playing a trick on your brain. If you see, if you're processing something that seems very human and real, It's no different than processing like dream imagery or something. Your brain, your perceiving brain is accepting it as real. So I want to get to that place in your brain while you're watching the movie. You know?
But you've also like adapted your quote unquote, I know it's a collaborative effort, but like the style of rotoscoping animation throughout, like obviously it's changed a lot since when you did it in a scanner darkly. Like, was there certain areas you were trying to totally change, or was it just a natural progression of the technology?
Well, it's different. Yeah. I mean, Tommy and I felt like, we kind of left that on the field a long time ago. It's very different what we were doing here. It's really nothing. It's not even interpolated rotoscoping, it's just call it performance capture. We're dropping everything we're doing into animated environments. We're on Scanner or Wake in Life. We're kind of animating everything you see. With this, we're not, all you're getting from that particular technique is the outline of the character and their gestures, but everything else is animated. The background, everything else is created in 2D and 3D. And so we kind of have this mashup of techniques to get these different looks. So and none of it's really special. It's not proprietary. It's just existing technology. Anyone can do it. It's just what ideas and styles you want to bring to these techniques. But we were really kind of we thought we were in a way trying to create that retro look. So we were sort of going backwards, if anything. I mean, that's our challenge here, to in a digital medium create as much of an analog feel as possible.
How do you think you achieved that?
Well, again, it's just the looks, the ideas, what you bring to it. Bring those textures. Like, we'll have scratchy film and we'll do that. So. Yeah. But these are just tools, it's just tools. You work with 150 animators and, communicate really well and, try to, people work hard, that's what, rotoscoping, some people kind of think, they lessen it or they don't think it's something. I never understood that. I was like, tell that to the people who are spending just.
The poor guys doing it.
1 minute. If you think it's easy, animate 1 minute of film the way we do it, and we'll see in about 3,000 hours later, come tell us it's not animated,
Very, very slow process. Rotoscoping is not, it's not easy.
It ain't no shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a technique, just like anything. And it's old, it's as old as animation itself. So, and it's very, isn't that what we're doing always? We're trying to represent life and anything that will help you get there. You see it in all art forms, So it's kind of a animation version of that, I think.
Big rule of cinema is to show and not tell, but your films are very conversational, of course. But this has a narrator, and even the narrator feels like he's having a conversation with me. Like, what was the motivation but around structuring a kind of a narration?
Yeah, it does have that kind of, I wanted the feel, it's a storytelling feel. I wanted it to be like, sit back and I'm going to tell you a story. If you really start the movie like that. If Jack Black is opening a book and saying, sit back, I'm going to tell you a wild tale of an adventure I had. Yeah. That's kind of the storytelling trope I was kind of starting from. We're going to narrate, and the narrator will point out to kids who weren't alive, like ironies and humor. There'll be little signposts along the way that will need a little bit of instruction, but a little bit of, he'll put a shade on it. Like the person reading the story is bringing a lot to it by the way they're shading it, and expressing it. So I just thought narration has a lot of possibilities, and I'm not using it here as some kind of narrative patch. It's so integral. It's so intertwined. It wasn't like, and then 3 days later we turned it, like I cut out 50 minutes of the movie and I have to tell you it's not, I'm not using it for that. I'm using it as a device that goes hand in hand with the images you're looking at.
These films are so meticulously rehearsed and everything is kind of controlled by the time you start to shoot it, that the kind of magic you found through the rehearsal process is evident on film. And obviously collaboration is a big part of your process with actors, but how did you preserve that then moving across to the animation beyond the rotoscope?
Yeah, well, the collaborative process never ends. It gets a little hierarchical just for communication purposes, you know?
Yeah.
But we would have calls where I would get on with all the and we were burdened. The pandemic had begun. So it's not like I could just go over to Amsterdam for a week and hang out with everybody and look over shoulder, you know, and it was a communication challenge. We were all in our own bubbles. You know, usually animators are working in teams and they can look, everybody's home. So it became a huge communication challenge. So no one's, you know, wasting any time accidentally on anything. So, but we really got after that. It was constant communication and great supervision, I would guess, and great effort by everybody. It's organizational. It's a lot of things, but I just think communication is the key. But I feel that way no matter what. Talking to, you know, department heads or anything, that's the challenge of a director, is to figure out how to communicate specifically. And that's what animation is. It's like approve or disapprove. If you're disapproving, why? And, you know, just to try to communicate exactly what you're going for. You know?
Did you ever get over in the end to the guys?
No, don't have. I mean, it was over. No.
Yeah.
They came here. You know, a lot of them came for our premieres and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Good to meet a lot of them in person. There was a few. Matthias, you know, he was on the set because, you know, everything we shot was a special effect to be fitted into an animated environment that we had already kind of designed. Not the animation design so much as the size of it.
Yeah.
How big the actors would be in the frame. It was all kind of pre-planned. Then we'd have to kind of invent as we went after that fact. But, you know, but I would listen, you know, if he'd come over to me and go, ooh, that's going to be very difficult if you move like that's really hard I'm like, okay. I won't move the camera that radically there. You know, just like, I don't want to do something that's going to take an extra 1,000 hours to achieve.
Yeah.
Or like, yes, I'm kind of like, we always have our final eye on animation, you know, practically speaking.
You don't tend to move your camera a lot though, when you do shoot, like in your films, which obviously lends to the conversational style of it. Like when you shot this, I'm curious, was it all against green screen or was it natural?
100% green screen. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And were you kind of just shooting as a static shot, or did you have cut-ins and stuff like that, or was it always kind of wide and let the animators figure it out?
No, it was always, you know, I shot it kind of like I would a movie, but with in mind camera movement.
Okay.
Is an issue. You know, you got to be smart about that.
Yeah.
So I felt a little more constrained than I would on most movies, where I'd, you know, feel free to, you know, do a Steadicam move or set up a long dolly track and track with actors or something like that. That was a little more complex here, but we didn't have, this is unlike most movies I make. I didn't have long scenes of dialogue between two people. I just didn't. If you look at the movie, it's very short scenes. Usually a lot of them are one shot, or it's a lot of cuts. Yeah. This has more cuts than this has so many more cuts than most movies I would make, because it's just shorter sequences.
And I guess that kind of lends to the passage of time that you're trying to create with this, you know, the kind of flashback of, you know, showing a child's life while also structuring it around the rocket launch and everything. Like there's a huge amount of time to compress into that as well. Yeah, I mean, if not compressed, it's just on top of each other. They're almost it's all happening simultaneously. Yeah. His fantasy, his remembrance of it is happening at the same time he's watching it on TV. So it's how to transition between those. That's a challenge for visual storytelling. It's really, a lot of it is your transitions, how you escape
in and out of how you layer those worlds in. That, you put a lot of thought into that.
Mm-hmm. Did you put it, was that all pre-thought, or did it come out during the editing process as well? Because you must have had to edit the film before it went to animation.
Yeah. It's pre-thought, like, I think that's a director's job. Like, what's the next shot after this? How am I getting in and out of this scene? What's the shot, If I close here and then I'm a wide in the next, it's like writing. It's like prose rhythm. If you don't put any thought to that, you have a clunky film. If I'm going to end on the exact same composition, the next thing is like going to be jumpy, so sorry, that's just what a director should do.
Yeah.
If you feel if you watch a movie that's pretty clunky and kind of awkward, it's like they don't have that particular skill, I guess, It's called prose rhythm.
You were talking there for a moment about the idea of memory, like his memory transplanted, that fantasy, and I like the design of the kind of blurred backgrounds and different, like, multiple layers and stuff. I don't know if that was kind of akin to showing that, memory is not always totally correct. You're trying to pluck these kind of ideas. But what I really like about it is you're transplanting all this really, to me, in two parts. Like, there's obviously the kid's memory, but then the anecdotal memory of what life was like then. And the only way you can get that is through research, whether that's home videos, and it's this kind of collective memory from everyone else to try and shape your story.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. We have, as a culture, we have a collective cultural memory based on images.
Yeah.
And that's what we have, and that's what we got to work with. What we remember when we remember something. Everybody thinks they saw it in real time. Well, they just saw images of it. They weren't there, but it was happening in the world. So yeah, that's kind of cool to mix that with personal memories too.
I have a big box of videotapes from my granddad. He used to always record us when we were younger.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, I mean, because again, that's the idea of, you can rely on other people's memories to tell stories and stuff. But I'm like, oh my God, I don't remember any of that. And you put on a tape and you watch it back, and you might relive it and you might not, And
you'll notice that over time, that will be your memory. Like, I remember playing in a swimming pool, one of the little blow-up pool as a kid. It's like, well, I don't really remember that. You remember watching the video of you doing that enough that it's now here.
Yeah.
So that's how memories, you can have memories of it all becomes a blur up here in your brain. So memories, there's no way memories are very exact, or they're subject to change. It's been proven, scientifically over and over. That's why they really shouldn't have, police lineups and eyewitness testimony is 100% unreliable.
Yeah.
Especially if any time goes on. I'm fascinated by this. I've read so many scientific studies and all that. So, you could pass a lie detector test saying you saw something and you could be wrong, but your entire facility thinks it's right. So that's pretty dangerous,
Yeah. It's very interesting as well. Someone told me recently that, like, I don't know how true this is. You'll probably be able to correct me, but I think it's an interesting theory of, like, your memory is a memory of a memory. You know what I mean? You're always remembering the last time.
We've always projected onto the brain whatever the current technology is. A long time ago they thought, the brain's like an engine, and then it became a video camera, then it's a computer. We're just projecting on the brain. But what the brain, when it comes to memory, it's we always like to think there's an accurate taping device. It's a video or it's a replaying of something. It's like, no, it's not. Wrong analogy. It's a theatrical production.
Oh, very good.
You're getting the cast back together. You're dressing sets. Every time you remember something, you're recast. That's why people show up. Like, you've had 47 performances of that, but then suddenly Aunt Millie is here. She's never been there before, but she's from another production that was 2 weeks before, but now she's here.
Yeah.
So you can look at her and say, you were there. I remember you were at that party. And like, I wasn't at that party. No, I can see you in my mind. you've conflated a memory, so it's the theatrical production. It's not
that's so cool.
recording.
That's a really great way of looking at it. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Let me ask you this then, because obviously you said this is mildly autobiographical. Like, was there any memories from your childhood you were kind of surprised to recall when you were writing this?
I'm never surprised because I do, all that said about that, I have the most exacting memory that a person can have. I really do.
Okay.
And so I'm very confident in my memory. Yeah. And people around me have been proven many, many times to be
hard to win an
but
argument.
Even though I admit it's a theatrical, I'm just pretty exacting.
Yeah.
So it's all memories, but slightly out of context, and you can play with that. Mm-hmm. But it's all, that element of the movie is all from,
even back then your memory is that good, is it? Like, you're able to recall so well back then. That's amazing. No, I'm a freak in that category. I mean, it doesn't make me a good student. I couldn't I have like a photographic recall of experience, but not, if I read the science book chapter, I wouldn't remember that at all because I'm ADHD. I would remember something else as reading. So it made me average student. But when it comes to, I'll freak people out sometimes, Wow.
Someone I haven't seen in 20 years, I'll recall our whole, we were outside the hospital, your dad was there. I'll remember the whole conversation and they won't remember any. I can tell you exactly what kind of day it was, what we talked about, for so much of, I freak people out. One time I met a guy, he'd been a football player at USC. I was on a set in LA and I was like, wait, were you on I was just kind of running through my memory.
Yeah.
I was like, were you on the Dating Game like in 1973 or 4? And this is like 2005.
Wow.
He just looked at me and like, I freaked him out. But I remember he told me a couple things, USC football, his last name. And I said, yeah, you didn't win, but you should have, because you sang this song. He was just freaking out. He was like, I said, yeah, I got the greatest memory of anybody. So,
yeah.
But if you get enough connections, I can put it together. But I don't know. Yeah. It's all there, for better or worse. That's not necessarily a good thing. You remember everything, bad and good.
Well, I think you've turned it into, from my own personal experience, I'd like to say this to you. I think you've turned it into a very positive attribute, in the sense that, like, when you talk about memory of experience, like the ability to connect that with someone else is very true. And that's probably, I think, most of the reason of the success of your films is how authentic the experiences feel. Do you know what I mean? And whether that's your ability to remember the minutiae of the situation, I'm not sure, but it's fascinating to think about.
I think in film, I'm trying to create like realistic environments.
Yeah.
So that, don't have anything specifically to do with memory. It's just like a tonal thing about reality, maybe.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's a challenge, like to recreate life in a believable form, in an artificial form, you know, like film. It's all staged and it's a recreation. It's not easy, but to be accepted as real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to me, that was the challenge, to carve out a piece of time and make it feel like it's authentic to some experience. And yet, I think that's what visual storytelling is, it's just what pitch you want to hit with that, depends on what story you're telling. And depending on the story, you don't have to worry about certain elements. If you're telling a kind of fantastical action thriller, no one's going to stop and say, hey, well, that's not, you can get away with, in horror film, it depends on the genre you're in. You can just get away with a lot of things that just aren't real, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're trying to say this is kind of a real conversation between two people, it's got to feel real. I don't think one's harder than the other. It's just where you're choosing, what story you're choosing to tell and what you want people to take away from it.
You crafted this whole story. You collaborated with your performers and everyone, and not just performers, obviously all the technical crew in creating this, shooting on a green screen. But what kind of boundaries really surprised you when you start to work on the animated side of this?
I never really, it was also designed. I never felt boundaries. I felt kind of boundless within the parameters of our shots, what we're trying to achieve. It was forever kind of amazing. And I don't know, we felt the possibilities all the way to the end, of something we could do to a scene to bring another level to it. We really encourage all the animators, like you guys, the same I would at cast. You guys are collaborators. Leave your fingerprints on this. Bring us ideas. Like, hey, what if I do this? And, we're just open to any inspiration, like what makes this scene even more interesting? What can we do, visually, graphically, and, I remember we were toward the end when we were designing the opening credit sequence, and one of our animators say, "Hey, I want to try something with the Netflix logo." I'm like, "Yeah, do it." And she brought up all the different, she wrote Netflix and all the different styles of TV shows. You see a Batman, you see a Bewitched, you see I was like, that's fucking brilliant.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was just saying, yeah, sure. They didn't want to say the idea. They said, I'm going to try something and send it to you.
Yeah, cool.
And it's like, that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
So it was constant surprises. You design, you think something, but that's why you collaborate. You get things that you never maybe would have, thought of. Like working with an actor, their skill set is ultimately the one that's going to be on the screen.
Yeah.
And I felt that way with the animation. It's like, well, here's a baseline, but we're reaching for as much as we can get, so when people rise to the occasion, and there's a lot of your, I always want to feel in film that you can exceed your expectations for everything, that there's a baseline of what you have to get. And then you're really searching for so much beyond that.
Yeah.
But when you start, you don't know how you're going to get there. But with the right conditions, the right vibe among collaborators, you can get there. If everyone's on the right wavelength and you're trying, and you've created an atmosphere where everyone can, thrive and just work and have new ideas based on additional ideas that everyone's, so you can get to some pretty great places. You get the right people together. Yeah. It's fun.
Freedom to fail, basically,
Yeah. That's what the arts really are,
Yeah.
You're trying things and failing constantly, and then you offer the world your greatest hits. Your, winnowed down best effort.
Yeah.
No one wants to hear you practice for 20 years on your violin, but we do want to hear when you really reach that virtuosic level. Yeah. Then you're ready for public consumption. And we take for granted the 20 years you spent. That's your price of admission to get to our earbuds.
Yeah. Well, I think
isn't that how it works, though?
Well, I think it's slightly different in film because, or any artist's journey, like you're seeing them film by film essentially succeed and fail at the same time as they go in their process,
Right. But that's after they've gotten to the area you could even see it, for every, before true. Anyone was seeing my first film, I have a closet full of films that I feel like I wouldn't bother anyone with because I was learning / failing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put the public through my learning process. You can judge my best efforts always, but you didn't have to suffer through the 10 years of me kind of figuring out what I was doing. But very different than like a stand-up comedian's career.
Yeah.
They do have to publicly flail around for a decade before they're really funny or good.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of courage. I would have quit a long time ago. Film provided me a very private world to feel like I was making my progress in by my own definition. There was no outside arbiter so very different. Each art form demands different different groundwork, I guess.
Well, listen, I just, as a final point, I just want to say, obviously, thank you so much for your time, Richard. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, definitely. It's been a great pleasure for me to talk to you. Yeah. No, I think this film, what surprised me the most is when I was watching, you put in the documentary footage, and that was or like start cutting in, historical reference and stuff, and that was such a joy to watch. Like, it was really truly different to something I'd seen before, and again, like, thank you so much for gifting some part of my life to me, in the shadows.
It's fun to see things you think and see them in a fresh way.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to do that than to reanimate something you think So it was a blessing of the form we were using to take a cultural memory or a history and kind of, give it a new look. Yeah. Slightly new in our story. So
yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah, cool. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for that conversation. That was great. That
all
was
right.
good
Well, great
for me,
Great talking to you. Well, good for me too. We're all alive here.